The rugged wilderness of Colorado's Shadow Creek Valley stretched endless and wild around Pine Ridge Ranch as 5 armed men approached through the early morning fog, their ATVs growling like predators on the hunt. They couldn't have known that. The weathered rancher tending to his cattle, Daniel "Silent Shadow" Blackwood, was once known as Iron Sight, the most decorated marksman in Navy SEAL history, with confirmed eliminations at distances that military experts still studied a decade. Later, their fatal miscalculation would cost them everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp autumn morning painted Shadow Creek Valley in rich amber and gold as the notorious Reeves gang made their final preparations along the winding dirt road leading to Pine Ridge Ranch. Leading the group was Victor Reeves, whose face carried a jagged scar from his left eye to his jawline, a permanent reminder of the 3 prison guards he'd hospitalized during his escape from Rockford Maximum Security Prison using nothing but a sharpened metal lunch tray. His younger brother, Ethan Reeves, rode beside him on a customized ATV, methodically checking a tactical sniper rifle that had already claimed 2 lives during their most recent string of ranch robberies across 3 states. The high-powered scope caught the early morning light as his fingers moved with practiced precision over the weapon. Behind them, their loyal crew maintained tight formation that reflected years of coordinated operation. Mason "Ghost" Winters, their reconnaissance expert whose 4 tours in Afghanistan had taught him to navigate any terrain undetected, constantly scanned the tree line through specialized military-grade binoculars. The massive bulk of Travis "Bulldozer" Jackson rumbled forward on a reinforced ATV that struggled under his 280-pound frame, while their newest recruit, the unpredictable Kevin "Switchblade" Lawson, brought up the rear, eager to prove his worth. To the gang's deadly reputation, Victor Reeves had chosen Pine Ridge Ranch carefully. The modest 200-acre property sat nestled in a remote corner of Shadow Creek Valley, its rich pasture land and small herd of prize cattle representing years of solitary work. Their surveillance suggested a simple operation, one aging rancher living alone, with only occasional supply deliveries and twice-monthly visits from a local veterinarian. The property's isolation made it perfect for their particular brand of violence. As they passed the weathered wooden sign marking the ranch's boundary, Victor noticed the owner in the cattle pen, a lean man in his early 50s, methodically checking his herd. Daniel Blackwood moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime around livestock, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined a calf's leg. His rifle, an old Winchester, leaned against the fence post out of reach, a mistake no experienced rancher should make in such a dangerous country. "Looks like our winning ticket," Ethan sneered, loud enough to carry across the still morning. "Air probably doesn't even know which end of that rifle to point." The gang's laughter echoed off the surrounding hills, but Victor remained silent, studying the scene with the instinct that had kept him alive through countless robberies and violent confrontations. What the Reeves gang couldn't see was how Blackwood's weathered hands, now gentle with the young calf, had once steadied a Barrett M82A1 through 72 hours of waiting for a crucial extraction mission in Fallujah. They didn't notice how his eyes, behind those wire-rimmed glasses, tracked their every movement with the same precision that had once earned him the nickname Iron Sight, the marksman other SEALs spoke of with reverence. Inside the small ranch house, Dr. Melissa Turner watched the scene unfold through the kitchen window, her hand instinctively reaching for the satellite phone Blackwood had insisted she keep nearby. As the local veterinarian, she knew pieces of Blackwood's past that he'd shared during long evenings treating sick livestock, had seen the precision shooting trophies hidden away in his study, though he'd made her promise never to speak of them. The Reeves gang parked their ATVs near the barn, the engines falling silent as they dismounted in practiced unison. They didn't notice how Blackwood's hand had stilled on the calf's flank, didn't see the slight shift in his posture that would have told any combat veteran that a predator was preparing to strike. They remained ignorant of the fact that for the first time in 8 years, the legendary marksman felt the familiar tension of an approaching storm. Young Jimmy Parker watched from the shelter of the feed storage shed where he'd been stacking hay bales, his heart racing with recognition. As Blackwood's part-time ranch hand, he'd discovered more about his employer than most, had witnessed the older man practicing at dawn, making shots that seemed to defy physics. His father, retired Sheriff Robert Parker, had warned him never to mention the time he'd seen Blackwood put 8 rounds through the same hole at 600 yards, shooting from positions that made Olympic marksmen look like amateurs. As the barn door swung shut behind Victor and Ethan Reeves, Blackwood carefully removed his glasses, folding them with deliberate precision. His movements, though unhurried, carried an underlying grace that seemed at odds with his rancher's appearance. He nodded slightly to Dr. Turner through the window, a silent signal developed over months of careful preparation. Melissa understood. It was time to quietly withdraw to the reinforced basement Blackwood had insisted on building, claiming it was just for storing veterinary supplies and emergency equipment. The autumn wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow from the distant mountains. In the cattle pen, Daniel's silent shadow, Blackwood, felt the familiar clarity settling over him, the same focused calm that had once made him a legend among Navy SEAL snipers. The Reeves gang had chosen his ranch as their next target, but they had no idea they were walking into the kill zone of a man who had turned precision shooting into an art form. Their mistake would prove to be their last. The notorious Reeves brothers hadn't always been predators. Their descent into violence began in the run-down neighborhoods of East St. Louis, where their father's death in a factory accident left them with nothing but bitter memories and a burning desire for revenge against a system they believed had failed them. Victor Reeves, the eldest, learned his first lessons about power in the concrete confines of Rockford maximum security, where survival meant becoming the very thing society feared most. The scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw told a story that had become almost mythical in criminal circles. During the bloodiest prison riot in Rockford's history, Victor had found himself cornered in Block D, with 3 guards who had been particularly brutal during his first year of incarceration. Armed with nothing but a sharpened cafeteria tray, he emerged alive while his attackers required extensive hospitalization. The incident earned him not just the scar, but a reputation that would become the foundation of his criminal enterprise. Ethan Reeves, younger by 3 years, possessed a different kind of darkness. Where Victor learned violence in prison, Ethan discovered his talent for cold precision in the seemingly innocent world of competitive shooting. His skill with a rifle was undeniable, but it was his enjoyment of the power it gave him that worried even his brother. The tactical rifle he now carried had begun its journey as a legitimate competition weapon before being turned to darker purposes. Each of its documented kills had been made at ranges that impressed even experienced marksmen, though Ethan cared more for the fear his reputation inspired than the technical achievement. The Reeves brothers had transformed their small-time gang into a sophisticated criminal operation by targeting isolated ranches across 3 states. Their methodology was as precise as it was brutal. Mason Winters, their scout, would spend weeks studying potential targets, using the skills he'd learned in Afghanistan to analyze security weaknesses and escape routes. His military background should have taught him to recognize the subtle signs of a fellow veteran, but pride had made him careless. The defensive modifications to Blackwood's ranch had registered as nothing more than the paranoid preparations of an isolated rancher. Travis Jackson brought more than just intimidating size to the operation. His experience as a demolition specialist in the mining industry made him invaluable. Kevin Lawson represented the new generation of the gang's evolution. Barely 26, he had grown up idolizing the Reeves brothers' exploits. His youth made him reckless, his eagerness to prove himself making him more dangerous than his seasoned counterparts. He had yet to learn that enthusiasm without wisdom was a fatal combination in their line of work. The customized tactical knives he carried on each hip had already taken one life in their most recent raid, and he was eager to prove his value. Again, what separated the Reeves gang from common criminals was their understanding of psychological warfare. Each raid began with a show of overwhelming force, but it was their reputation that did the real damage. Stories of their previous victims circulated through ranch country like modern folklore, tales of defiance met with calculated brutality, of ransoms paid that didn't prevent the promised consequences. They had turned terror into a science, never realizing they were about to encounter a man who had mastered far deadlier forms of combat psychology. Victor Reeves's tactical approach had been honed through 9 successful ranch raids, each more profitable than the last. They targeted properties just small enough to lack serious security, but large enough to have substantial cash reserves. Modern ranching still operated largely on physical currency, a fact the brothers had exploited with increasing precision. Pine Ridge Ranch fit their criteria perfectly. Remote location, minimal staff, and an owner who seemed more concerned with his cattle than security. The gang had spent 2 weeks studying Blackwood's routines, logging the comings and goings of the few visitors he received. Dr. Melissa Turner's regular visits to tend to the cattle were noted but dismissed as irrelevant. The presence of young Jimmy Parker was seen as an advantage, hostages made for useful leverage. Even the reinforced basement had been observed, marked as a potential strong room to be breached. Every detail was catalogued with professional thoroughness, yet they had missed the most crucial element of all, the true nature of the quiet rancher they planned to rob. What the Reeves gang could never have known was that they weren't the first predators to stalk Daniel Blackwood. During his time as a Navy SEAL sniper, he had played deadlier games of cat and mouse with targets who had decades more experience than these self-styled outlaws. The patience that made him seem like an easy target was the same patience that had once allowed him to wait 72 hours for a single crucial shot, his skills earning him the highest confirmed kill count in his unit's history. The autumn. Sun climbed higher over Shadow Creek Valley as the Reeves gang prepared to execute their carefully planned raid. They had no way of knowing that every step they took followed a path Daniel Blackwood had anticipated years ago when he first chose this remote ranch as his refuge from a violent past. The very isolation that made them confident would prove to be their undoing, as they were about to learn that the deadliest predators are often the ones that seem most harmless. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the barn, Victor Reeves began outlining their usual approach to his crew, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to absolute obedience. Outside, Blackwood continued his unhurried work with the cattle, his movements betraying nothing of the combat-honed instincts that were already calculating ranges, angles, and fields of fire. The stage was set for a confrontation that would remind the world why some legends are born not from seeking violence, but from mastering its darkest arts. What appeared to be a simple Colorado ranch revealed itself as something far more sophisticated to those who knew where to look. Daniel Blackwood hadn't chosen Pine Ridge Ranch by chance 8 years ago. The property's natural features had spoken to the sniper in him, the rolling terrain that created perfect sightlines, the elevated positions that commanded views of every approach, and the deep shadows of the pine forest that could conceal a patient hunter indefinitely. urgency medicine rotation during veterinary school. Dan never does anything without purpose, she reflected as she secured the basement door, remembering the day 2 years ago when Blackwood had first revealed glimpses of his true background. She'd been treating a difficult case, a horse with a badly infected leg wound, when Blackwood had assisted her with a precision that spoke of extensive combat medical experience. That night, over coffee, he'd shared just enough of his past for her to understand why he kept a trauma kit worthy of a combat hospital hidden beneath his seemingly simple ranch. Young Jimmy Parker moved silently through the morning shadows toward his assigned position, his movements showing the results of Blackwood's careful mentoring. What the Reeves gang had dismissed as simple ranch work had actually been careful training, learning to move quietly over rough terrain, understanding wind patterns, and mastering the art of remaining unseen in plain sight. Blackwood had chosen Jimmy as his assistant not just for his strength with ranch work, but for his ability to learn and keep secrets. The barn, which the gang had so casually occupied, was far from the simple structure it appeared to be. Blackwood had redesigned it, using principles learned in urban warfare. The heavy support beams weren't just for structural integrity. They were positioned to create natural shooting lanes and cover positions. The high loft windows, which seemed placed for ventilation, had been carefully calculated to provide optimal firing positions while minimizing exposure. Even the arrangement of hay bales and equipment followed a deliberate pattern, creating corridors that could channel movement in predictable ways. Throughout the ranch, Blackwood had positioned supplies and equipment with tactical precision. What looked like random tools scattered around the property were actually cached weapons and ammunition, each placed within easy reach of predetermined defensive positions. The old Winchester leaning against the cattle pen fence wasn't his only rifle. It was merely the one he allowed to be seen. Hidden throughout the property in waterproof cases, disguised as common ranch equipment, lay the tools of his former trade: a custom M40A5 sniper rifle, several Navy-issue sidearms, and his pride, the Barrett M82A1 that had earned him his reputation. In Fallujah, Dr. Turner had helped Blackwood maintain this hidden arsenal, using her veterinary credentials to legally obtain cleaning supplies and components that might otherwise have drawn attention. She understood that for Blackwood, these preparations weren't about paranoia. They were about responsibility. The same skills that once took lives, he had told her during one of their late-night conversations, can also protect them. It's not about seeking violence, it's about being ready when violence seeks you. The ranch's security systems went far beyond simple preparations. Blackwood had installed passive infrared sensors at key points around the property, their presence hidden by seeming to be part of the electric fence system for the cattle. Solar-powered cameras disguised as bird houses covered every approach. Even the ranch's livestock played a role in the defense network. Their behavior in response to strangers had been carefully trained to provide early warning without being obvious about it. Jimmy Parker had discovered much of this infrastructure gradually over the 2 years he'd worked at the ranch. Blackwood had trained him not just in ranch work, but in understanding the principles behind each preparation. Everything serves 2 purposes, Blackwood had explained, while teaching him to maintain the hidden security systems. A good defense doesn't look like defense at all. It looks like everyday life. The Reeves gang, despite their careful surveillance, had missed the subtle signs that would have warned more experienced observers. They hadn't noticed how the ranch's fence lines provided interlocking fields of fire, or how the scattered equipment created natural barriers that could channel movement. They had failed to recognize that the seemingly random patterns of daily ranch work actually maintained clear lanes of fire around critical approaches. Most crucially, they had misread Blackwood himself. In him, they saw an aging rancher who spent more time with cattle than people. They didn't see the combat veteran who had turned his entire property into a carefully crafted defensive position, using skills honed through years of warfare to create a fortress that didn't look like one. His apparent isolation wasn't a weakness. It was a tactical advantage. His gentle manner with animals wasn't softness. It was the same patience that had once allowed him to wait motionless for days to take a crucial shot. As the morning sun climbed higher, Blackwood continued his seemingly casual work with the cattle, each movement carefully positioning him to maintain awareness of the barn where the Reeves gang plotted. 8 years of peace hadn't dulled his instincts. They had merely given him time to perfect his preparations. The trap was set, though it looked nothing like a trap to those about to spring it on themselves. In the coming hours, the Reeves gang would learn why some of the deadliest predators in nature appear to be the most harmless, right up until the moment they strike. The Reeves gang's initial show of force unfolded with practiced precision inside Blackwood's barn. Victor Reeves took center stage, his scarred face twisted in a predatory smile as he outlined their demands to his crew. Travis Jackson had already begun placing his charges at key structural points, while Kevin Lawson positioned himself near the windows, his matched tactical knives drawn and ready. Mason Winters maintained his watch on the perimeter, his military training evident in how he established clear lines of sight. What they saw as tactical preparation, Blackwood recognized as predictable patterns. Through the reflection in a water trough, he tracked their movements while maintaining his seemingly casual work with the cattle. Every position they took, every defensive arrangement they made, spoke volumes to his combat-trained mind. Their confidence in their own abilities had made them careless, choosing obvious positions that any experienced operator would expect. Ethan Reeves emerged from the barn first, his customized sniper rifle held with the casual arrogance of someone who believed himself the most dangerous marksman in the valley. "Time to talk business, old man," he called out, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Let's discuss how this plays out with minimal fuss." The words might have sounded reasonable, but Blackwood caught the underlying anticipation of violence in the younger Reeves' tone. Inside the reinforced basement, Dr. Melissa Turner monitored the situation through a carefully concealed observation system. Blackwood's foresight had included installing small cameras that provided crucial viewpoints of the property. She watched as Travis Jackson discovered the ranch's safe in the tack room, exactly where Blackwood had wanted it to be found. The massive man's eyes lit up at the sight of the formidable steel box, never suspecting it was merely the first piece in a more elaborate trap. Kevin Lawson grew bolder, beginning to vandalize equipment with theatrical brutality. He knocked over carefully arranged tools, slashed at hay bales with his knives, and punctured water barrels. Each act of destruction followed a pattern Blackwood had seen before: young predators establishing dominance through casual violence. What Lawson didn't realize was that every movement drew him further into pre-sighted firing positions. "Your reputation for handling cattle is impressive," Victor Reeves said, emerging from the barn with the calculated menace that had broken so many others. "But I wonder if you're as good with people?" He approached Blackwood directly, ignoring how the older man's movements had become perfectly still. "We've done our homework. Monthly supply runs to Silver Creek, regular visits from the vet, the occasional cattle buyer, all paid in cash, which means you keep money on hand." Blackwood maintained his calm demeanor, though his mind was already calculating angles and distances. He recognized the technique Reeves was using, establishing dominance through detailed knowledge of the target's routine. It was the same approach he'd once used to understand his own target's patterns, but Reeves' implementation was clumsy, revealing more about his own limitations than he realized. "The safe in your tack room," Victor continued, gesturing toward the barn. "Our friend Travis is working on it now. Save us all some time and give us the combination." His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol. The gesture meant to emphasize the threat without making it explicit. "Cooperation makes everything easier. Just ask the Johnson family up in Wyoming. Oh wait, you can't. They weren't cooperative." Young Jimmy Parker, hidden in his assigned position, felt his heart race at the casual mention of violence. Through the scope of the rifle Blackwood had positioned for him, he could see every detail of the unfolding scene. His hands were steady, though just as Blackwood had taught him. "Fear is natural," Blackwood's words echoed in his memory. "Control it by focusing on your role, your training, your purpose." Mason Winters, conducting his perimeter sweep, approached the feed shed where Jimmy had been working earlier. His Afghanistan training made him thorough, but 3 years of civilian life had dulled the edge that might have helped him spot the subtle signs of recent movement. He passed within 8 feet of Jimmy's position without detecting the young man's presence, proving that Blackwood's lessons in concealment had taken root. The morning wind shifted slightly, carrying with it the scent of pine and sage. Blackwood noted the change automatically, his mind adjusting shooting calculations, even as he maintained his appearance of concerned compliance. "The safe," he said, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age that he'd cultivated as part of his cover. "Please, there's no need for violence. I can open it for you." Ethan Reeves laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the morning air. Finally some sense from the old man. He turned to his brother with a triumphant grin. "See? Sometimes they can be taught." The younger Reeves' grip on his rifle relaxed slightly. Another small tell that Blackwood filed away for later use. Travis Jackson's voice boomed from inside the barn. "Boss, this safe's something else. Going to take more time than usual to crack it." The frustration in his tone was evident, and Blackwood allowed himself a small internal smile. The safe had been specifically chosen for its complexity. Another piece in his elaborate preparation. Victor Reeves' face darkened at the news. "Looks like we're going to be here a while, old man." He gestured to Kevin Lawson. "Search the house. Find anything that might speed up our friend's cooperation." The young man moved with predatory eagerness, unaware he was walking into carefully prepared fields of fire. What happened next would remind everyone present why some of the deadliest ambush predators in nature appear completely harmless right up until the moment they strike. The Reeves gang had chosen their target believing they were the most dangerous things in the valley. They were about to learn just how wrong that assumption had been. As Kevin Lawson disappeared into his house, Daniel Blackwood's mind drifted momentarily to another time, another place, where the stakes had been equally high. But the terrain far different. The streets of Fallujah had taught him lessons that would soon prove invaluable. In that urban maze of broken buildings and hidden threats, he had learned that patience was more lethal than aggression, and preparation more decisive than raw skill. Memory that surfaced now was particularly relevant, a 3-day operation that had earned him the nickname Iron Sight. His target had been a high-ranking insurgent commander who had grown overconfident in his own security measures. Blackwood had waited motionless for 72 hours, enduring heat, thirst, and exhaustion for the perfect shot. That same patience now kept his hands steady as he watched the Reeves gang make the same mistake his previous targets had made, believing that power meant invulnerability. Dr. Melissa Turner, monitoring the situation from the reinforced basement, remembered the night. Blackwood had first shared details of that mission. It had been during a difficult carving, when complications had forced them to work through the darkness. Something about the focused intensity required for the medical procedure had reminded him of those long hours in Fallujah. The hardest part wasn't the shot, he had told her. his hands steady as they worked to save the calf and cow. It was choosing to wait when every instinct screamed for action. Inside the house, Kevin Lawson was discovering that Blackwood's apparent simplicity extended to his living space. The ranch house's interior presented an image of modest functionality: worn furniture, basic amenities, and few personal touches. What Lawson failed to notice was how every piece of furniture had been positioned to create natural barriers and shooting lanes, how every window offered carefully calculated fields of fire to covered positions outside. Victor Reeves's voice cut through Blackwood's memories. "Travis says your safe is military grade. Interesting choice for a simple rancher." His tone carried an edge of growing suspicion, almost like you were expecting trouble. The scarred man studied Blackwood's face, looking for any reaction that might confirm his emerging doubts. Blackwood allowed a slight tremor to enter his voice as he responded, maintaining his carefully crafted persona. "Found it at a surplus auction. The salesman said it was reliable." The lie came easily, crafted from 8 years of maintaining his cover. The safe was indeed military grade. He'd chosen it specifically because he knew how Travis Jackson would approach it, how long it would take to breach. In his hidden position, Jimmy Parker remembered the day he'd helped Blackwood install that safe. The older man had been precise in his instructions about its placement, about the exact angles of approach available to anyone attempting to crack it. At the time, Jimmy had assumed it was just the thoroughness of an experienced rancher. Now, watching the drama unfold, he understood it had been the planning of a combat veteran preparing his battlefield. Ethan Reeves grew increasingly agitated as his brother's suspicion became more evident. His rifle moved with nervous energy, betraying his growing unease. "Something's not right here, Victor," he muttered, just loud enough for Blackwood to hear. "Everything's too neat, too organized." His military experience, though limited to failed attempts at basic training, was finally registering the subtle wrongness of their situation. Mason Winters, still conducting his perimeter sweep, was beginning to notice similar inconsistencies. His Afghanistan background was finally breaking through years of civilian complacency, recognizing patterns that his conscious mind hadn't yet processed: the placement of equipment, the arrangement of structures, the clear lines of sight. It all spoke of tactical consideration that went far beyond routine ranch management. Blackwood watched these realizations on his opponents' faces, remembering similar moments from his time as a sniper. There was always a point in an operation when the target began to sense the trap, when instinct warned of danger, even if logic couldn't explain why. In Fallujah, he had learned to recognize these moments, to use them to his advantage. Uncertainty made people predictable. Fear made them careless. From the house came the sound of breaking glass, Kevin Lawson taking out his frustration on Blackwood's modest possessions. The noise made Victor Reeves wince slightly, his control over the situation showing its first cracks. Professional criminals didn't make unnecessary noise, didn't draw attention without purpose. The younger members of his crew were departing from the careful protocol that had made their previous raids successful. Travis Jackson's voice carried from the barn again, tinged with growing frustration. "This safe's got tricks I ain't seen before. Boss, might need to use the heavy stuff." The admission carried more significance than the gang realized. Blackwood had chosen that specific model, knowing it would resist conventional methods, forcing them to consider more explosive alternatives. Each minute they spent focusing on the safe was another minute for his plans to mature. Dr. Turner watched through the basement's monitoring system as the tactical situation continued to develop. She understood now why Blackwood had spent so many hours teaching her to read body language, to recognize the signs of mounting tension in both humans and animals. The Reeves gang crew was showing the same stress indicators she'd learned to watch for in horses before they spooked. The subtle shifts in posture, the nervous energy, the heightened awareness of their surroundings. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dawn mist. Blackwood felt the familiar clarity of combat awareness settling over him, the same focused state that had once allowed him to execute impossible shots under extreme conditions. The Reeves gang had unwittingly initiated a confrontation that would remind the world why some of the most effective predators in nature were the ones that appeared most docile until the moment they struck. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily. On the thermal currents rising from the valley floor, Blackwood tracked its movement automatically, noting wind direction and speed, adding these calculations to his mental preparation. Soon, very soon, the Reeves gang would learn the same lesson his targets in Fallujah had learned, that the deadliest person in any confrontation wasn't always the most obviously dangerous. The community surrounding Pine Ridge Ranch had always understood more about Daniel Blackwood than they let on. Sheriff Robert Parker, watching the situation unfold through his binoculars from a concealed position 2 miles away, remembered the day Blackwood had first arrived in Shadow Creek Valley. The former SEAL's background check had revealed enough to make the veteran law enforcement officer recognize a fellow warrior seeking peace, though the deepest parts of Blackwood's military record remained classified. In his hidden observation, host Parker maintained radio silence, trusting in the plans they had developed over years of quiet preparation. His son Jimmy wasn't the only one Blackwood had trained. The sheriff and several trusted deputies had spent countless hours learning from the former sniper, turning the entire valley into an interlocking network of observation posts and response positions. Today, those preparations would prove their worth. Dr. Turner's role went far beyond that of a simple veterinarian. Her regular visits to Pine Ridge Ranch had created a perfect cover for coordinating with the broader community. Local ranchers, hunters, and even the high school's shooting team had all played parts in Blackwood's careful preparations. Though none knew the full scope of his planning, they simply understood that the quiet rancher who helped train their children in marksmanship and gun safety was someone worth protecting. Inside the house, Kevin Lawson's destructive search had revealed nothing of value. The family photos on the walls showed Blackwood with various community members at local rodeos, county fairs, and charity events. What the young criminal failed to recognize was how these images mapped out a network of relationships, each person in those photos representing another strand in the web of support Blackwood had carefully woven around his new home, Victor Reeves. Growing unease manifested in his increasingly aggressive posture. "Your reputation with cattle brings people from all over the state," he said, his voice carrying forced casualness. "Must be profitable work." What he didn't know was that Blackwood's expertise with livestock was more than just a cover. It was a deliberate choice that allowed him to build relationships throughout the region while maintaining his low profile. In the reinforced basement, Dr. Turner accessed a secure communication system Blackwood had installed years ago. The equipment, disguised as standard veterinary monitoring gear, allowed her to maintain contact with key members of their support network. She watched through the monitoring system as Eleanor Mitchell, owner of the local feed store, quietly coordinated the evacuation of outlying farms. The elderly woman had been one of the first to recognize Blackwood's true nature, having seen similar qualities in her late husband, a Vietnam-era Army Ranger. Travis Jackson's frustrated voice carried, "You're from the barn again. This whole setup feels wrong, boss. Everything's too perfect, too planned." The demolition expert's instincts were finally registering what his conscious mind had missed. The subtle signs of military-grade preparation hidden beneath the ranch's rustic exterior. His experience with explosives had taught him to recognize patterns, and everything about Pine Ridge Ranch followed a pattern he was only now beginning to understand. Mason Winters, completing another perimeter sweep, found himself increasingly disturbed by the terrain's tactical layout. His Afghanistan training was finally breaking through years of civilian complacency, recognizing how every natural feature had been subtly enhanced to create interlocking fields of fire. "Victor," he called out, his voice tight with professional concern, "we need to talk." Ethan Reeves's agitation had reached a critical point. His rifle moved between potential threats with increasing speed, revealing the growing fear beneath his aggressive exterior. "The whole valley feels wrong," he muttered. To his brother, "Like we're being watched." His instincts weren't wrong. Concealed throughout the surrounding hills, members of the local hunting club maintained silent observation posts, each positioned according to Blackwood's careful instructions over years of casual shooting lessons. Blackwood allowed himself a moment of quiet pride in his community as he watched the Reeves gang's confidence continue to erode. The relationships he'd built weren't just cover. They were the foundation of a new kind of defensive network, one built on trust and mutual protection rather than violence and fear. Each person played their part, from Jimmy Parker learning the art of concealment to Eleanor Mitchell coordinating community response, all without drawing attention to their preparations. The morning sun cast shorter shadows now, approaching the position Blackwood had designated as the optimal time for action. In the distance, the scheduled supply run from Silver Creek would be turning back, warned off by Eleanor's quiet network of communications. The weekly mail delivery would bypass the valley entirely, following contingency plans established through years of careful relationship building with local service providers. Sheriff Parker watched as his deputies took up their predetermined positions, each movement calculated to remain invisible to the gang's increasingly nervous surveillance. The law enforcement response Blackwood had helped him design wasn't about overwhelming force, it was about careful coordination and precise application of pressure. Sometimes, Blackwood had told him during one of their planning sessions, the most effective response is the one your opponent never sees coming. Dr. Turner monitored the increasing signs of stress in the Reeves gang's body language, applying the observational skills Blackwood had taught her. The gang's professional facade was cracking, revealing the uncertainty beneath. They had expected to find an isolated rancher, vulnerable and alone. Instead, they had stumbled into the territory of a man who had spent years building not just defenses, but relationships, turning an entire community into an invisible support network. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and sage across Shadow Creek Valley as Blackwood's plans continued to unfold. The Reeves gang had chosen their target, believing they were the predators in this scenario. They were about to learn that true strength wasn't found in violence and intimidation, but in the quiet bonds of community and the patient preparation of those who understood that the most effective defense was the one that remained invisible until the moment it was needed. The first significant shift in the morning's deadly chess game came when Travis Jackson discovered the hidden compartment behind Blackwood's gun safe. The demolitions expert had been methodically working his way through the tack room's seemingly simple layout when his experienced hands detected an inconsistency in the wall paneling. His triumphant call brought Victor Reeves rushing into the barn, expecting to find their prize. Instead, what they discovered sent the first real chill of uncertainty through the gang's leadership. The compartment contained a meticulously maintained Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle. The weapon's sleek profile was unmistakable to anyone with military experience. Mason Winters, examining the precision instrument with growing apprehension, recognized modifications that went far beyond civilian specifications. The custom scope mounting system, the reinforced bipod attachment, and the wear patterns on the Gripple spoke of extensive combat use. Most telling was the small brass plate affixed to the stock, bearing the inscription Nav Spec War Team 3, Operation Iraqi Freedom. Ethan Reeves's voice carried an edge of panic as he connected the pieces. Nav Spec War, that's Navy SEALs. His eyes darted to the window where Blackwood could still be seen calmly tending to his cattle. The Iron Sight operations were part of that campaign. The younger Reeves's hands tightened on his own rifle, his previous confidence evaporating as he realized the implications. They weren't dealing with a simple rancher. They were in the kill zone of one of the most legendary Navy SEAL snipers in modern combat history. In the reinforced basement, Dr. Turner watched through the monitoring system as the Reeves gang's carefully planned operation began to unravel. The discovery of Blackwood's military background was only the first thread being pulled. Throughout the ranch, careful observation would reveal other signs, the precision-machined parts in the workshop that matched specialized shooting equipment, the reloading setup that spoke of someone who understood ballistics at an expert level, the topographical maps of the valley marked with precise distance calculations. Victor Reeves's face hardened as he examined the evidence before him. His prison-learned instincts were screaming warnings, but pride and the weight of his reputation prevented him from making the smart choice: immediate withdrawal. Instead, he began issuing orders with forced confidence, trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped from his grasp. Travis, forget the safe, wire the barn. Winters, get eyes on all approaches. We're dealing with a different class of target now. Kevin Lawson, returning from his search of the house, brought more disturbing news. He had found a locked room in the basement, and his attempts to breach it had revealed steel-reinforced walls. More concerning were the fresh tire tracks he discovered behind the house, signs that someone had recently departed in haste, taking unknown variables with them. The young criminal's earlier bravado had been replaced by nervous energy as he realized they were operating blind in potentially hostile territory. Blackwood, still maintaining his position by the cattle pen, noted every detail of their increasing agitation. Their body language, their positioning, their unconscious reactions to stress, all provided valuable intelligence to his combat-trained mind. He had seen similar behavior in Fallujah when insurgent groups realized too late that they had walked into a carefully prepared trap. The growing fear in their movements told him his strategy was working exactly as planned. Mason Winters, whose Afghanistan background made him the most dangerous threat at this moment, had begun to implement proper defensive protocols. His military training was finally overriding the civilian complacency that had led them into this situation. Yet even these professional preparations played into Blackwood's deeper strategy. Every defensive position the gang adopted had been anticipated and accounted for in his years of planning. Travis Jackson's expertise with explosives now became a liability rather than an asset. His growing understanding of the ranch's tactical layout made him increasingly hesitant to place charges, recognizing that any explosion might trigger prepared countermeasures. The demolitions experts' reluctance to act decisively further heightened the tension among the gang members, creating fissures in their once confident unity. Young Jimmy Parker, maintaining his concealed position, watched the gang's deteriorating cohesion through his scope. Blackwood's training had taught him to read these signs, the increasing space between team members, the unconscious positioning that prepared for individual rather than coordinated action, the subtle tells that indicated trust breaking down under pressure. Each observation confirmed that the trap was closing exactly as his mentor had designed it. Sheriff Parker, coordinating with his deputies through silent hand signals, recognized the pattern from his military days. The Reeves gang was displaying classic signs of a unit beginning to fragment under psychological pressure. Their earlier confidence had been based on believing they held all the advantages. Now, faced with evidence that they had severely underestimated their target, that confidence was crumbling. The autumn sun had reached its zenith, casting minimal shadows across the valley. Blackwood knew this was the most dangerous moment, when desperate men might take reckless action to regain control of a situation they could feel slipping away. His years of combat experience had taught him that the most critical phase of any operation was when the target realized they were trapped but hadn't yet accepted defeat. What followed would demonstrate why some of the most effective combat operations in history were won through psychological dominance rather than direct confrontation. The discovery of Blackwood's true identity triggered a cascade of memories for Mason Winters. The former Army Ranger had heard whispers about iron sight during his own deployments, tales of impossible shots taken during the bloodiest days of Fallujah. Standing in Blackwood's barn, examining the evidence of that legend's presence, Winters felt the weight of his miscalculation. He had led his team into the operating zone of a man whose skills had become military legend, whose techniques were still taught in advanced sniper courses. Victor Reeves paced the barn's interior, his prison-hardened instincts warring with his pride. The scattered tools and equipment around him, which hours earlier had seemed like simple ranch implements, now revealed their dual purpose to his increasingly paranoid observation. Every item had been positioned to provide cover or channel movement. Even the barn's support beams seemed to mock him, their placement creating natural firing lanes that could turn the structure into a killing zone with minimal effort. Ethan Reeves's earlier bravado had transformed into barely controlled panic. His hands moved constantly over his rifle, checking and rechecking components with obsessive intensity. The weapon, which had previously given him such confidence, now seemed inadequate compared to the precision instruments they had discovered in Blackwood's hidden armory. Each piece of equipment they found told the story of a man who had elevated shooting beyond skill into artistry. Travis Jackson worked with increasing frustration at his explosive charges, acutely aware that his usual methods might be exactly what Blackwood expected. The demolitions expert had learned his trade through practical experience, but he was now facing someone who understood the science of combat at its highest level. Every placement felt like a potential trap, every decision weighted with the possibility of playing into their opponent's hands. Outside, Blackwood maintained his position by the cattle pen, his movements still displaying the calm precision that had made him legendary among military snipers. Years of combat experience had taught him that psychological pressure often accomplished what direct confrontation could not. He could read the increasing stress in his opponent's body language, seeing the same signs he had observed in targets during his military operations. Dr. Turner, monitoring the situation from the reinforced basement, recognized the patterns Blackwood had taught her to identify. The Reeves gang was displaying the classic signs of unit breakdown under pressure. Their movements had become uncoordinated, their positioning sloppy. Even their communication showed signs of strain, with increasingly sharp exchanges between team members betraying their eroding confidence. Young Jimmy Parker maintained his concealed position with a discipline that would have made his mentor proud. Through his scope, he observed details that spoke volumes about the gang's deteriorating cohesion. Kevin Lawson had unconsciously separated from the others, seeking individual cover rather than maintaining his usual coordinated positioning with the team. His matched tactical knives, previously handled with theatrical flourish, now seemed to weigh heavily in his inexperienced hands. Sheriff Parker, coordinating his deputies' positions through silent signals, saw the situation through experienced eyes. Blackwood's psychological operation was textbook perfect, allowing the targets to discover information in a controlled manner, letting their own imaginations amplify their fears. Each revelation about Blackwood's background served to further Unbalanced the gang's tactical thinking. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and sage across the valley as Blackwood's plans continued to unfold. In the distance, a hawk's cry echoed off the surrounding hills, the sound making Kevin Lawson jump visibly. His nerves had been stretched to the breaking point by the growing realization that they were facing an opponent far beyond their experience. Victor Reeves' voice carried forced authority as he tried to regain control of his fracturing team. "He's just one man," he declared, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "We still have the numbers." What Reeves failed to understand was that numbers meant little when facing someone who had made a career of evening impossible odds through preparation and skill. Mason Winters knew better. His Afghanistan training helped him recognize the full implications of their situation. Every aspect of the ranch's layout, every carefully positioned item, spoke of years of tactical preparation. They weren't just facing one man. They were dealing with an environment that had been meticulously crafted into a weapon by someone who understood warfare at its highest level. In the reinforced basement, Dr. Turner accessed Blackwood's secure communication system, coordinating with the broader support network they had established. The community's response was silent but effective, each member playing their role in the larger strategy. Eleanor Mitchell's feed store had become a coordination center, quietly directing traffic away from the valley while maintaining normal appearances. Blackwood's patience, honed through countless hours in combat observation posts, allowed him to read the subtle signs of his opponent's growing distress. The Reeves gang had begun the morning believing they were the predators, but each passing hour revealed more evidence that they had walked into the territory of a far more dangerous hunter. Their earlier confidence had been based on facing simple ranchers and townspeople. Now they found themselves trapped in a tactical situation that would have challenged the most elite military unit. The sun continued its arc across the Colorado sky, its light revealing new details of Blackwood's preparations. With each passing hour, the Reeves gang had stepped into a confrontation that would demonstrate why some of the most effective combat operators in history weren't the ones who sought violence, but the ones who understood how to control every aspect of the battlefield. Before the first shot was fired, the breaking point began with a sound that cut through the mounting tension, the distant report of a rifle shot echoing across the valley. Victor Reeves's head snapped toward the noise, his prison-honed instincts recognizing that the shot hadn't come from any of his men. The sound triggered an immediate response from Mason Winters, whose Afghanistan training told him exactly what they were hearing. A precision rifle being tested at extreme range, the echo pattern suggesting a distance of well over 1,000 yards. Blackwood remained motionless by the cattle pen, but his mind processed every detail of his opponent's reactions. The single shot had been carefully planned, executed by Sheriff Parker from a predetermined position. It served multiple purposes, measuring wind conditions, testing the gang's response patterns, and most importantly, planting seeds of uncertainty about exactly how many shooters they might be facing. In the barn, Travis Jackson's movements became increasingly erratic as he tried to position his explosive charges. The demolitions expert had discovered that key structural points, which would normally be ideal for placing his devices, had been subtly reinforced in ways that suggested intimate knowledge of blast patterns and structural weaknesses. Every attempt to gain tactical advantage revealed another layer of Blackwood's preparations. Dr. Turner watched through the monitoring system as the psychological pressure began to show clear effects. Kevin Lawson had unconsciously moved closer to Ethan Reeves, his earlier bravado replaced by visible nervousness. His tactical knives, which had seemed so threatening hours earlier, now appeared almost childish compared to the professional military equipment they had discovered throughout the ranch. Ethan Reeves's composure continued to deteriorate as he attempted to establish a defensive position. His experience with long-range shooting, which had previously been a source of pride, now worked against him. He understood just enough about precision marksmanship to recognize the tactical disadvantages of their position. Every window, every gap in the barn structure, every open space suddenly seemed to offer potential firing lanes for a shooter of Blackwood's caliber. Mason Winters found himself engaged in a mental chess game he hadn't expected. His Afghanistan background helped him recognize the sophisticated nature of Blackwood's preparation, but this knowledge only heightened his concern. The ranch's layout, which had initially appeared random, now revealed itself as a masterwork of tactical design. Each building, each piece of equipment, each natural feature had been positioned to create overlapping fields of fire while offering minimal effective cover to potential threats. The autumn wind shifted subtly, carrying with it the promise of approaching weather. Black factors often proved more decisive than individual skill. The approaching storm front would add another layer of complexity to the tactical situation. Victor Reeves's attempts to maintain control became increasingly desperate. "Spread out, maintain, visual contact," he ordered, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty that his men couldn't miss. The gang leader was beginning to understand that they weren't just facing a skilled opponent. They were caught in an elaborately prepared tactical situation that had been years in the making. Jimmy Parker, still maintaining his concealed position, observed the growing chaos through his scope. Blackwood's training had taught him to read these signs, the increasing frequency of nervous weapon checks, the unconscious clustering of team members seeking reassurance, the subtle signs of command, structure breaking down under pressure. Each observation confirmed that the psychological operation was proceeding exactly as planned. The distant sound of thunder rolled across the valley, adding nature's voice to the mounting tension. Travis Jackson's expertise with explosives had become a source of anxiety rather than confidence. Each attempt to rig charges revealed new complications, new evidence of countermeasures he hadn't anticipated. The demolition expert was beginning to understand that his usual methods might be exactly what Blackwood had prepared for. In the reinforced basement, Dr. Turner coordinated with the broader support network through Blackwood's secure communication system. Eleanor Mitchell reported that the last civilians had been quietly evacuated from potential danger areas, while Sheriff Parker confirmed his deputies were in position to contain any attempted escape routes. The community's response demonstrated the effectiveness of years of careful preparation and relationship building. The sun disappeared behind gathering storm clouds, casting the valley into premature twilight. The changing light conditions added another layer of psychological pressure to the Reeves gang's increasingly fragile tactical position. What had begun as a seemingly simple raid had transformed into a sophisticated tactical engagement against an opponent whose preparation and skill far exceeded their experience. Blackwood's patience, honed through countless hours in combat observation posts, allowed him to read the mounting signs of stress in his opponent's body language. The Reeves gang had initiated this confrontation, believing they were the apex predators in this scenario. Each passing hour revealed more evidence that they had stumbled into a tactical situation that would have challenged the most elite military units in the world. The approaching storm front promised to add nature's fury to the already volatile situation. In the distance, another single shot rang out, its echo distorted by the gathering clouds. The sound served as a reminder that they were operating in an environment completely controlled by their opponent, facing a man whose military career had been built on turning patience and preparation into lethal efficiency. The crisis erupted when Kevin Lawson made a fatal error in judgment. Unnerved by the mounting pressure and distant rifle shots, the young criminal attempted to establish a superior tactical position by climbing to the barn's loft. The wooden ladder creaked under his weight, the sound echoing through the tension-filled air. At that moment, Blackwood's voice carried across the yard for the first time since the confrontation began. "The loft is a kill box," he stated matter-of-factly, his tone carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "Every window up there has been pre-sighted from multiple positions. The range cards are still in my desk drawer if you'd like. To verify the calculations." The clinical precision of his words had more impact than any threat could have achieved. Kevin Lawson froze on the ladder, suddenly aware of his exposure from at least 3 different angles he could identify. Victor Reeves recognized the voice of experience when he heard it. The calm delivery, the casual reference to range calculations, the implicit demonstration of tactical control. Everything confirmed what the discovery of Blackwood's military credentials had suggested. They weren't dealing with a lucky shot or a weekend warrior. This was someone who had turned precision shooting into an art form, who had spent years preparing this battleground while they remained ignorant of its true nature. Ethan Reeves's composure finally shattered. "He's playing with us," he shouted, his voice carrying an edge of hysteria, like he played with targets. "In Fallujah." The younger Reeves brought his rifle up, aiming at Blackwood's position by the cattle pen. Before he could complete the motion, another single shot rang out from the distant hills. The bullet struck the ground precisely 3 feet in front of Ethan's position, sending fragments of gravel spraying against the barn wall. In the reinforced basement, Dr. Turner watched through the monitoring system as Blackwood's carefully orchestrated pressure began to show results. The Reeves gang crew was displaying textbook signs of tactical breakdown, fragmented communication, deteriorating fire discipline, loss of coordinated movement. Each symptom confirmed that the psychological operation was achieving its intended effect. Mason Winters, whose Afghanistan background had initially made him the most dangerous member of the crew, now became a liability to his team. His training allowed him to recognize the full implications of their situation, to understand just how completely they had been outmaneuvered. "This whole valley is a prepared position," he announced, his professional assessment cutting through the remaining bravado. "Every angle, every approach, every fallback position, he's had years to get it perfect." Travis Jackson's expertise with explosives became another source of mounting pressure. His careful examination of the barn structure had revealed subtle modifications that spoke of intimate knowledge of blast dynamics. "The charges won't work," he reported, his voice tight with professional frustration. "Every critical point's been reinforced. Setting them off might just make things worse." The demolition expert's admission confirmed what Blackwood's earlier words had implied. They were operating in an environment that had been systematically hardened against their usual tactics. The gathering storm added nature's fury to the psychological pressure. Wind gusts carried the scent of approaching rain, changing the ballistic calculations for any potential shooting. Blackwood remained motionless by the cattle pen, but his mind processed every environmental shift, every tactical adjustment required by the changing conditions. His years of combat experience had taught him that weather often proved as decisive as skill in determining battlefield outcomes. Young Jimmy Parker maintained his position, observing through his scope as the Reeves gang struggled to adapt to their rapidly deteriorating situation. The tactical dynamics had shifted completely, with the hunters now feeling hunted. Through his earpiece, the soft voice of Sheriff Parker provided continuous updates on the positioning of deputies throughout the surrounding terrain. The law enforcement response had been quietly mobilizing for the past hour, each officer moving into predetermined positions that Blackwood had mapped out years before. "Hold position, son," came his father's steady voice. "Remember what Dan taught you about patience." Jimmy acknowledged with a single click of his transmitter, maintaining radio discipline just as Blackwood had drilled into him over countless weekend training sessions. What had seemed like casual shooting lessons and hunting trips now revealed their true purpose, preparation for exactly this kind of situation. The first heavy raindrops began to fall, striking the dusty ground with audible impacts. As the moisture darkened the earth around the Reeves gang's position, Victor Reeves witnessed something that sent a chill through his hardened exterior. Previously invisible lines began to emerge in the soil around the barn, the rain tracing patterns that only someone with military engineering experience would recognize. These carefully graded drainage channels served a dual purpose. While they appeared to be simple water management for the ranch, these subtle ground modifications actually created predetermined firing lanes, each one calculated to funnel movement into specific areas. Blackwood's voice carried through the strengthening storm, its quiet certainty more commanding than any shout could have been. In 3 minutes, the drainage system will channel water through the north side of the barn. Any explosives Mr. Jackson placed in the lower sections will be compromised. The clinical precision of his assessment struck Travis Jackson like a physical blow. The demolition expert realized that even the ranch's water management had been designed as a defensive measure. Every aspect of this property, down to how rain would flow across it, had been calculated with tactical considerations in mind. Inside the barn, Ethan Reeves gripped his rifle with white knuckles. "Victor, we need to move, now." His voice carried the edge of a man pushed beyond his tactical comfort zone. Mason Winters, his military training finally overriding his criminal adaptations, made a professional assessment that cut through the remaining bravado. "He's right. This isn't a simple ranch. It's a fully prepared defensive position. We're in a funnel trap." The former Army Ranger had finally grasped what they were experiencing. A masterclass in defensive warfare orchestrated by someone who had turned combat preparation into an art form. The passive infrastructure of Pine Ridge Ranch was revealed as an integrated tactical system, with each element designed to restrict movement, channel approaches, and create overlapping fields of fire. In the reinforced basement, Dr. Turner monitored the unfolding situation through Blackwood's surveillance system. The ranch's cameras, disguised as ordinary security measures, revealed the full scope of the gang's deteriorating position. Kevin Lawson had completely abandoned any pretense of tactical positioning, his young face showing the strain of realizing they were hopelessly outmatched. The storm's intensity increased, and with it came another revelation. The rain activated solar-powered ground lights, seemingly ordinary ranch safety measures, which suddenly illuminated every major approach to the barn. This lighting system, which appeared to be a simple safety feature, actually served to eliminate any advantage of darkness, while creating harsh shadows that would make accurate shooting nearly impossible for anyone not intimately familiar with the terrain. Sheriff Parker, observing through his scope from a distant position, recognized the psychological mastery of Blackwood's approach. Instead of confronting the gang directly, he had orchestrated a situation that used their own expertise against them. The demolitions expert couldn't trust his explosives, the marksman couldn't rely on his shooting positions, and the tactical specialist couldn't find any angle that hadn't been accounted for years in advance. As rain began to seep under the barn door, Travis Jackson made a discovery that finally shattered the gang's remaining confidence. The water flow revealed thin metal plates embedded in the concrete floor, carefully positioned to direct the explosive force of any charges upward rather than outward. What looked like ordinary reinforcement for heavy equipment storage was actually a sophisticated blast containment system. "This isn't just preparation," Jackson muttered, loud enough for Victor to hear. "This is professional counter-demolition work, military grade." The rain intensified, drumming on the metal roof of the barn with increasing fury. Lightning flashed across the valley, momentarily illuminating the entire landscape in harsh white light. In that brief, stark moment, Mason Winters spotted what he'd been unconsciously searching for since their arrival: the elevated shooting positions scattered throughout the property, each one disguised as ordinary agricultural infrastructure. Water towers positioned for optimal sight lines. Equipment sheds placed to cover critical approaches. Even the windmill, now visible in the distance, offered a commanding view of the entire valley floor. "He's not just defending," Winters said, his voice carrying the weight of professional respect despite their dire situation. "He's turned the entire property into an interlocking defensive grid." Outside, Blackwood remained in position, seemingly unconcerned about the rain now soaking through his work clothes. His stillness, maintained despite the strengthening storm, demonstrated the patience that had made him legendary in combat. That same patience had allowed him to spend years preparing this ground, to wait calmly as overconfident opponents walked into a trap of their own making, and now to watch as their resistance crumbled without him having to fire a single shot. Victor Reeves, his criminal instincts finally overriding his pride, recognized the shift in tactical dynamics. "Spread out," he ordered, his voice struggling to project authority through the rain. "Keep moving, don't give him a stationary target." The response came not in words, but in action. Simultaneously, 5 red laser dots appeared on different members of the gang, each one holding rock steady despite the weather. The message was clear. Blackwood wasn't working alone, and every member of the crew was under precise observation. The revelation of the laser sights, a deliberately theatrical touch that Blackwood had carefully planned, served as the final breaking point. Kevin Lawson dropped his knives almost immediately, the blades falling into the muddy ground with dull thuds. Travis Jackson stepped away from his partially placed charges, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender that spoke louder than words. Ethan Reeves's rifle lowered incrementally, its barrel pointing toward the ground as the last of his confidence drained away. Through it all, Blackwood had hardly moved from his position by the cattle pen. His stillness, maintained despite the strengthening storm, demonstrated the patience that had made him legendary in combat. That same patience had allowed him to spend years preparing this ground, to wait calmly as overconfident opponents walked into a trap of their own making, and now to watch as their resistance crumbled without him having to fire a single shot. The rain continued to fall, but its rhythm now seemed to carry a different meaning. What had started as a tactical operation by a confident criminal crew had transformed into a masterclass in defensive warfare. The Reeves gang and their team had arrived believing themselves to be skilled predators, only to discover they had wandered into the territory of someone who had mastered far darker arts of combat during his military service. Their mistake would serve as a lesson that would be whispered about in criminal circles for years to come. A reminder that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones who appear most harmless until it's too late. The surrender of the Reeves gang unfolded with the same precise orchestration that had characterized every aspect of Blackwood's strategy. Through the strengthening storm, his voice carried instructions that left no room for misinterpretation. "Mr. Winters," he addressed the former ranger directly, "you understand tactical procedure. Have your people remove tactical vests and weapon belts, place them in the center of the yard, then move to the south wall of the barn." Mason Winters recognized the professional courtesy in Blackwood's words, the acknowledgement of his military background. More importantly, he understood that the instructions weren't just about disarmament. They were positioning the crew exactly where Blackwood wanted them, in a location he had undoubtedly prepared for just such a situation. "Do what he says," Winters ordered, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew when a tactical situation was completely lost. Dr. Turner watched through the monitoring system as the gang members complied. Kevin Lawson moved first, his earlier bravado replaced by an almost robotic compliance. Travis Jackson followed, the demolitions expert's movements showing the careful precision of someone who understood the lethal consequences of any sudden actions. Ethan Reeves hesitated until another laser sight appeared on his chest, the unwavering red dot providing all the persuasion necessary. Sheriff Parker coordinated with his deputies through silent hand signals, their positions remaining concealed, but ready. The law enforcement response had been part of Blackwood's preparation from the beginning, integrated into his defensive strategy with the same thoroughness he had applied to every other aspect. Each deputy knew their role, understood the importance of maintaining pressure without escalating the situation. Victor Reeves, watching his crews surrender, finally grasped the full magnitude of their failure. They had walked into an operation prepared by someone who had made a career of orchestrating precisely this kind of tactical superiority. Every move they had made, every decision they had taken, had been anticipated and accounted for years in advance. The rain continued to fall, emphasizing their exposure while revealing more evidence of Blackwood's preparation. Blackwood's voice cut through the storm again, addressing Travis Jackson. "The charges you placed, there's one against the north support beam that concerns me." The specificity of his knowledge made the demolition expert freeze. "The rain will reach it in approximately 2 minutes. Would you prefer to disarm it yourself, or should I have someone else handle it?" The professional courtesy in the question carried an implicit threat. Blackwood knew exactly where every explosive had been placed and had planned for their removal. Jimmy Parker maintained his position, observing through his scope as Jackson carefully approached his partially set charges. The young man had learned more about tactical operations in the past few hours than in all his previous training. Blackwood's orchestration of events demonstrated how superior preparation and patience could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower. The storm's intensity seemed to match the moment's gravity as Victor Reeves finally stepped forward to surrender. The gang leader's prison-hardened exterior had cracked, revealing the uncertainty beneath. Blackwood's voice acknowledged him with the same professional detachment he had shown throughout the confrontation. "Your reputation in three-state correctional facilities suggested you were smarter than this, Mr. Reeves. The tactical sophistication of your previous operations deserved better than such an obvious trap." In the reinforced basement, Dr. Turner began implementing the next phase of Blackwood's plan. The medical supplies she had carefully stockpiled weren't just for show. Blackwood had insisted on being prepared to treat any injuries that might occur. During a confrontation, it was another demonstration of his thoroughness, planning not just for combat but for its aftermath. The laser sights remained steady on their targets as Sheriff Parker's deputies began moving into visible positions. The law enforcement response had been coordinated weeks in advance, integrated into Blackwood's defensive strategy with the same precision he had applied to every other aspect. Each officer knew their role, understood the importance of maintaining pressure while allowing Blackwood to control the situation's resolution. Blackwood's voice carried new instructions through the rain. "Mr. Winters, have your people sit with their backs against the barn wall, ankles crossed, hands on their knees." The positioning wasn't arbitrary. It was designed to maintain control while providing clear fields of fire if anyone attempted resistance. "Sheriff Parker's deputies will approach from the east. Any movement before they arrive will be considered hostile." The storm continued to intensify, but its tactical impact had been nullified by Blackwood's preparation. The drainage systems he had installed channeled water away from critical areas, maintaining clear lines of sight despite the weather. Even nature itself seemed to bend to the will of someone who had spent years preparing for every contingency. As law enforcement began their final approach, Blackwood maintained his position by the cattle pen, his stillness a reminder of the patience that had allowed him to orchestrate this entire operation. The Reeves gang had arrived that morning, believing themselves to be skilled predators, only to discover they had walked into the territory of someone who had mastered warfare at its highest level. Their surrender wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of how thoroughly superior preparation could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed the true sophistication of Blackwood's preparation. As Sheriff Parker's deputies secured the Reeves gang and their crew, evidence of the rancher's tactical mastery became increasingly apparent. The rain had exposed hidden defensive positions throughout the property, each one carefully designed to appear as natural features of the landscape. What seemed like ordinary drainage ditches showed themselves to be carefully crafted firing positions, offering perfect angles while providing complete cover. Dr. Turner emerged from the reinforced basement to find Blackwood maintaining his characteristic calm as he supervised the securing of Travis Jackson's explosive devices. The veterinarians. Medical expertise proved unnecessary. Blackwood's strategy had achieved its objective without a single shot being fired. The precision of his psychological operation had accomplished what violence could not, breaking the will of experienced criminals without risking unnecessary casualties. Victor Reeves, now in custody, watched with a prison veteran's understanding as Blackwood's true capabilities became clear. The ranch's defenses, which had seemed almost mythical during the confrontation, proved to be even more sophisticated than they had imagined. Every aspect of the property had been modified for defensive purposes, yet none of these modifications were obvious until you knew exactly what to look for. The gang leader realized they hadn't just been outgunned, they had been completely outthought from the moment they chose this target. Mason Winters, his Afghanistan background allowing him to appreciate the tactical brilliance he had witnessed, found himself providing a professional assessment to the deputies processing his arrest. "In all my military experience," he stated, his voice carrying genuine admiration, "I never saw anything this comprehensive. He didn't just prepare the ground, he turned the entire valley into a tactical operation that could be run by one person." The former ranger understood that they had witnessed something that would be studied in military circles for years to come. Young Jimmy Parker emerged from his concealed position, the training Blackwood had provided proving its worth. The ranch hand's ability to maintain discipline throughout the confrontation demonstrated how thoroughly Blackwood had prepared not just his property, but also the people he trusted. Sheriff Parker greeted his son with evident pride, understanding that the young man had played a crucial role in an operation that would become legendary in law enforcement circles. Kevin Lawson, his youthful bravado completely shattered, sat in the back of a deputy's vehicle. His tactical knives had been secured as evidence, but the real prize was his newfound understanding of true professional capability. He had arrived, believing himself dangerous because he could handle weapons. He departed knowing that true mastery went far beyond simple technical skills. Travis Jackson's expertise with explosives had given him a unique perspective on Blackwood's preparations. As deputies carefully documented and disabled his, partially, and placed charges, the demolitions expert found himself explaining to law enforcement how thoroughly he had been countered. "Every place I considered for a charge," he detailed, had been subtly reinforced or modified to channel the blast effect away from critical structures. It wasn't just about stopping us, it was about controlling exactly how we would fail. Dr. Turner's role in the operation revealed itself to be more crucial than even the deputies had initially realized. Her regular visits to the ranch had provided perfect cover for establishing and maintaining the sophisticated communication network that had helped coordinate the community's response. The veterinary supplies in the reinforced basement included not just medical equipment, but also spare parts for the surveillance and communication system that had proven so crucial to the operation's success. Blackwood finally moved from his position by the cattle pen, his movements showing no sign of the tension that had underlined the morning's events. His interaction with law enforcement demonstrated the same precise professionalism that had characterized his handling of the confrontation. Each piece of evidence was documented with military precision, each aspect of his defensive preparations explained in detail that would prove invaluable for future law enforcement training. The storm began to clear, sunlight breaking through the clouds to illuminate the scene. Sheriff Parker coordinated with state authorities, knowing that the day's events would have implications far beyond their small valley. The Reeves gang had built their reputation on careful planning and professional execution, yet they had been systematically dismantled by someone who understood planning and execution on a completely different level. Eleanor Mitchell arrived with other community members who had played supporting roles in Blackwood's defensive network. Their presence revealed another layer of his preparation, the careful cultivation of relationships that had turned an entire community into an integrated defense system. Each person had known their role, understood their part in the larger strategy, yet none had ever drawn attention to their preparations. As the day drew to a close, the full impact of what had occurred began to register with everyone involved. The Reeves gang had arrived believing themselves to be sophisticated criminals, executing a well-planned operation. Instead, they had become unwitting participants in a demonstration of tactical mastery that would be discussed in professional circles for years to come. Their mistake had not just led to their capture, it had provided a masterclass in how thorough preparation and tactical patience could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower. In the days following the Reeves gang's arrest, the true significance of what had transpired at Pine Ridge Ranch began to emerge. State law enforcement officials, reviewing the incident reports, recognized that they had witnessed something unprecedented in civilian defensive operations. Blackwood's integration of military tactical principles into a ranch's defensive architecture represented an evolution in protective strategy that warranted serious study. Mason Winters, providing his statement to federal authorities, offered insights that only his Afghanistan background could appreciate. What makes this operation remarkable isn't just the physical preparation, he explained from his holding cell. It's psychological architecture. Blackwood didn't just prepare firing positions and defensive measures, he prepared an entire scenario that would lead experienced operators to defeat themselves. The former tactical specialist understood that they had participated in what would become a textbook example of defensive strategy. Sheriff Parker found himself fielding calls from law enforcement agencies across 3 states, all seeking to understand how a single rancher had systematically dismantled a criminal operation that had frustrated multiple state task forces. The answer, he explained in his official report, lay not in the sophisticated hardware or tactical positions, but in Blackwood's fundamental understanding of human nature. He didn't just predict what they would do, he created an environment that would make them do exactly what he wanted them to do. Dr. Turner's role revealed deeper layers of strategic sophistication. Her veterinary practice had provided perfect cover for establishing a community-wide defensive network, but it had served another purpose. Her regular visits to surrounding ranches had allowed Blackwood to build relationships throughout the valley, creating a web of support that remained invisible until it was needed. This social architecture proved as crucial to his success as any physical preparation. Kevin Lawson, during his interrogation, demonstrated how completely Blackwood's strategy had transformed his understanding of professional capability. "We thought we were dangerous because we could use weapons," the young man admitted. But real danger isn't about violence at all. It's about controlling every aspect of a situation so completely that violence becomes unnecessary. This insight, coming from someone who had previously glorified violence, demonstrated the educational impact of Blackwood's approach. Travis Jackson's technical analysis of the ranch's defensive preparations became a subject of study for law. enforcement training programs, the demolitions experts' detailed explanation of how Blackwood had anticipated and countered every standard breaching technique revealed layers of preparation that went beyond simple physical hardening. He didn't just protect against explosives, Jackson explained. He created a situation where attempting to use them would actually make our position worse. Victor Reeves, speaking to federal investigators, provided perhaps the most telling assessment. In prison, you learn to read people to spot weakness, the gang leader reflected. We thought we saw weakness in a quiet rancher who seemed more interested in cattle than security. What we actually saw was someone so confident in their preparation that they didn't need to display strength. This insight, from a man who had built his reputation on identifying and exploiting weakness, demonstrated how thoroughly Blackwood had subverted criminal operational assumptions. The community's response to the incident revealed another dimension of Blackwood's strategic depth. Eleanor Mitchell coordinated with law enforcement to explain how the valley's civilian population had been integrated into the defensive strategy, without ever compromising operational security. Regular social events, community projects, and casual conversations had created a network of informed participants who knew exactly what to do in a crisis without ever drawing attention to their preparation. Blackwood's interaction with federal tactical analysts demonstrated the professional depth behind his apparent simplicity. His explanation of how each defensive measure had been designed to appear as a natural part of ranch operations provided insights into a level of tactical thinking that went beyond military doctrine. The best defensive position, he explained, is one that doesn't look defensive at all until it's too late to matter. Young Jimmy Parker found himself providing demonstrations to law enforcement trainees, showing how Blackwood's lessons in movement and observation had allowed him to maintain crucial surveillance positions throughout the confrontation. The ranch, and ability to integrate completely into the background while maintaining tactical awareness, demonstrated principles that went beyond standard military or law enforcement training. The technical analysis of Blackwood's communication systems revealed another layer of sophistication. What appeared to be standard ranch equipment concealed a network of surveillance and coordination capabilities that matched military-grade tactical operations centers. Yet, every component had been carefully selected and positioned to maintain the appearance of ordinary agricultural infrastructure. As law enforcement completed their documentation of the incident, a new understanding emerged about the nature of effective defense. Blackwood had demonstrated that true security didn't come from obvious displays of force or sophisticated equipment, but from the patient development of integrated systems that remained invisible until needed. His success in neutralizing a sophisticated criminal operation without firing a shot provided a model for defensive operations that would influence professional thinking for years to come. 6 months after the Reeves gang's attempted raid on Pine Ridge Ranch, the impact of that rain-soaked morning continued to resonate through professional circles across the country. Daniel Blackwood's defense of his property had evolved from a local incident into a case study examined by military strategists, law enforcement trainers, and security specialists. The quiet rancher, who had once been known as Iron Sight, had provided a masterclass in defensive operations that challenged conventional wisdom about tactical response. The federal task force investigating the Reeves gang's criminal enterprise discovered that Blackwood's influence extended far beyond that single confrontation. Analysis of the gang's previous operations revealed a pattern of sophisticated tactical planning that had made them nearly unstoppable until they encountered someone who understood planning at a fundamentally deeper level. The contrast between their approach and Blackwood's preparation became required reading at the FBI Academy's Tactical Training Division. Dr. Melissa Turner found her veterinary practice transformed by the incident's aftermath. While she continued her regular rounds, her expertise in integrating medical preparation into defensive planning brought invitations to consult with emergency response teams nationwide. The protocols she and Blackwood had developed for maintaining operational security while building community support networks proved invaluable for rural law enforcement agencies facing similar challenges. Sheriff Robert Parker implemented training programs based on Blackwood's defensive principles, focusing not on firepower or equipment, but on patient preparation and psychological understanding. The most important lesson, he explained to a conference of law enforcement leaders, isn't about tactical positions or equipment. It's about creating an environment where superior position and preparation make violence unnecessary. His son, Jimmy's first-hand experience became an integral part of the training, demonstrating how young deputies could learn to observe and report without compromising their cover. Mason Winters, serving his sentence in federal custody, found himself regularly consulted by tactical instructors seeking to understand the psychological impact of Blackwood's strategy. The former Army Ranger's analysis of how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered provided insights that no outside observer could have offered. "We thought we were executing a sophisticated tactical operation," he wrote in a training document. "In reality, we were participating in a demonstration of how completely superior preparation can negate any tactical advantage." Gavin Lawson's transformation from arrogant young criminal to thoughtful student of tactical reality became a story shared in juvenile intervention programs. His testimony about how Blackwood's precise control of the situation had shattered his illusions about power and violence resonated with young people at risk of following similar paths. "We learned that true strength isn't about having the biggest weapons or being the toughest," the young man explained to a youth group. "It's about being so well prepared that you don't need to prove anything." Travis Jackson's technical analysis of Blackwood's defensive architecture continued to influence security planning across multiple industries. The demolitions expert's detailed explanation of how thoroughly his expertise had been neutralized provided invaluable insights for facility protection. Corporate security directors studied how Blackwood had transformed ordinary ranch infrastructure into an integrated defensive system without ever compromising its civilian appearance. Eleanor Mitchell's role in coordinating community support became a model for rural defense planning. Her demonstration of how normal social networks could be transformed into effective security systems without militarizing civilian life attracted attention from community leaders nationwide. The protocols she and Blackwood had developed for maintaining operational security while building community trust proved adaptable to various environments facing similar challenges. Blackwood himself remained characteristically modest about his achievement, but he understood the importance of sharing the knowledge he had accumulated. His careful documentation of how military tactical principles could be adapted to civilian defensive operations provided invaluable resources for those seeking to protect vulnerable communities. "The goal isn't to create fortresses," he explained to a group of security planners. "It's to develop environments where protection grows naturally from normal daily operations." Pine Ridge Ranch itself evolved into an unofficial training center, though it never lost its primary identity as a working cattle ranch. Law enforcement agencies and security specialists visited to study how Blackwood had integrated defensive measures into ordinary agricultural infrastructure. Each feature of the property demonstrated how tactical advantage could be achieved without sacrificing functional efficiency or drawing unwanted attention. The broader implications of Blackwood's success continued to influence professional thinking about defensive operations. His demonstration that superior preparation and psychological understanding could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower challenged traditional assumptions about tactical response. The incident proved that the most effective defense wasn't about overwhelming force or sophisticated equipment, but about patient preparation and profound understanding of human nature. As time passed, the legend of the quiet rancher who had systematically dismantled a notorious criminal gang without firing a shot grew in professional circles. But the true legacy of that confrontation wasn't found in the dramatic details of what happened, but in the deeper understanding it provided about the nature of effective defense. Blackwood had shown that true security grew not from the ability to dominate through force, but from the patient development of systems that made force unnecessary. 1 year after the Reeves Gang incident, Daniel Blackwood's defense strategies began attracting attention from the highest levels of national security. The Department of Homeland Security's Rural Protection Division launched a comprehensive study of how a single rancher had created a defensive system so sophisticated it could neutralize experienced criminals without relying on overwhelming force or advanced technology. Senior military analysts from the Pentagon's Tactical Assessment Division arrived at Pine Ridge Ranch to examine how Blackwood had adapted military principles to civilian application. What impressed them most wasn't the sophisticated integration of defensive measures, but how thoroughly these measures had been concealed within normal ranch operations. Colonel James Mitchell, leading the assessment team, noted in his official report that Blackwood had achieved something unprecedented, a civilian facility with military-grade security that remained completely undetectable to casual observation. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit found particular value in studying how Blackwood had engineered the psychological aspects of his defense. Dr. Elizabeth Winters, the unit's lead analyst, spent 3 weeks documenting how each element of the ranch's design had been carefully crafted to influence adversary behavior. What we're seeing here, she explained in her findings, is psychological warfare elevated to an art form. Every aspect of the property was designed not just to defend against threats, but to guide potential adversaries into making predictable decisions. Blackwood's integration of community support networks attracted attention from the Department of Defense's Civil Affairs Division. They recognized that his approach to building civilian cooperation without compromising operational security could have significant applications in conflict zones worldwide. The protocols he had developed for maintaining effective communication while preserving normal community life became required reading for civil affairs officers preparing for overseas deployment. Dr. Turner found herself consulting with the Centers for Disease Control's Emergency Response Division, helping them understand how medical preparation could be integrated into broader security frameworks without drawing attention. The system she and Blackwood had developed for disguising medical supplies and equipment as ordinary veterinary resources proved valuable for agencies planning for crisis response in vulnerable areas. The National Security Agency's Infrastructure Protection Department conducted a detailed analysis of how Blackwood had created secure communication networks using seemingly ordinary ranch equipment. Their findings led to new guidelines for protecting critical infrastructure in rural areas. The ability to maintain sophisticated surveillance and coordination capabilities while preserving an ordinary agricultural appearance became a model for facilities requiring discreet security measures. Sheriff Parker received funding from the Department of Justice to develop training programs based on Blackwood's approach. The emphasis on patient preparation and psychological understanding over equipment and firepower represented a significant shift in law enforcement thinking about rural security. What Blackwood demonstrated, Parker explained to a congressional committee on rural law enforcement, was that effective security doesn't require militarizing civilian spaces. It requires understanding how to make existing civilian infrastructure work defensively. The academic community also took notice. The Naval Postgraduate School's Department of Defense Analysis began incorporating case studies of the Reeves Gang incident into their curriculum. Professor Robert Chen, head of Asymmetric Warfare Studies, noted that Blackwood's success challenged conventional wisdom about force requirements for effective defense. This case demonstrates that superior preparation and psychological understanding can completely negate traditional advantages of force size and equipment. Blackwood's documentation of his defensive principles became required reading at advanced military training facilities. The Navy SEAL Sniper School incorporated his insights about integrating defensive positions into civilian infrastructure into their advanced coursework. The Army's Special Forces qualification course began using the Reeves Gang incident to teach principles of asymmetric defensive operations. The Department of Agriculture's Rural Security Division found particular value in how Blackwood had modified standard agricultural features for defensive purposes. Their analysts documented how ordinary ranch infrastructure, water management, systems, equipment storage, livestock handling facilities had been subtly enhanced to provide tactical advantages without compromising their primary functions. This approach to dual-use infrastructure became a model for protecting vulnerable rural facilities. The international security community also took notice. NATO's Rural Defense Initiative sent observers to study how Blackwood's principles could be applied to protecting isolated communities in conflict zones. The ability to create effective defensive capabilities without obvious militarization proved particularly valuable in areas where visible security measures might attract unwanted attention. What emerged from all these studies was a new understanding of how civilian defense could be approached in the modern era. Blackwood had demonstrated that effective security didn't require choosing between normal operations and tactical preparation. Instead, he had shown how defensive capabilities could grow naturally from ordinary civilian activities, creating protection, systems that remained invisible until needed. 18 months after the Reeves Gang incident, Shadow Creek Valley had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. The changes weren't immediately visible to casual observers. The ranches still operated as they always had. The community maintained its rural character, and daily life continued its familiar rhythms. Yet beneath this seemingly unchanged surface, Blackwood's influence had reshaped how the entire community approached the concept of security and mutual protection. The local sheriff's department, under Robert Parker's leadership, implemented what became known as the Pine Ridge Protocol, a comprehensive approach to community defense that emphasized preparation and prevention over reaction and force. Deputies received specialized training in observation techniques Blackwood had developed, learning to recognize potential threats while maintaining ordinary patrol routines. The emphasis shifted from visible law enforcement presence to subtle awareness and preparation. Dr. Turner's veterinary practice became a model for integrating medical preparedness into normal community operations. Other rural communities began studying how she had used regular veterinary rounds to establish and maintain emergency response networks without drawing attention. Her protocols for disguising medical caches as ordinary supply storage were adopted by clinics across 3 states, creating a network of prepared but unobtrusive medical response points. Eleanor Mitchell transformed her feed store into something far more sophisticated than its modest appearance suggested. While continuing to serve the agricultural community's normal needs, she developed systems for monitoring regional traffic patterns and maintaining awareness of unusual activity. Her methods for gathering and sharing information through ordinary business interactions became a template for rural intelligence networks nationwide. The local high school's agricultural program, under Blackwood's quiet guidance, began incorporating elements of his defensive philosophy into its curriculum. Students learned not just about farming and ranching, but about situational awareness and environmental observation. The program's graduates emerged with skills that went far beyond traditional agricultural education, though these additional capabilities remained invisible to outside observers. Young Jimmy Parker's experience during the Reeves Gang incident led to the creation of a youth mentorship program that spread throughout the region. Under the guise of traditional ranch work and outdoor activities, participants learned advanced observation techniques and defensive principles. The program's success in developing capable, confident young people while maintaining absolute discretion attracted attention from youth development specialists nationwide. Local businesses began implementing Blackwood's principles of discreet security enhancement. The bank modified its procedures based on his insights about psychological deterrence, while retail establishments adopted his methods for integrating defensive measures into normal operations. Even the local diner incorporated elements of his approach to environmental awareness, though customers would never notice the subtle improvements in security. The community's communication network evolved into something far more sophisticated than anyone outside the valley realized. Building on Blackwood's model, residents developed methods for sharing critical information through ordinary social interactions. Weekly church services, livestock auctions, and community events became opportunities for coordinated security updates, all while maintaining their traditional functions. Ranchers throughout the valley began applying Blackwood's principles to their own properties. Water management systems doubled as defensive positions. Equipment storage incorporated observation posts, and livestock handling facilities included carefully planned escape routes. Yet to any outside observer, these modifications appeared to be nothing more than practical agricultural improvements. The local hunting club transformed into an informal but highly effective training ground for Blackwood's defensive concepts while maintaining its traditional role. The club integrated advanced marksmanship principles and tactical awareness into its regular activities. Members developed skills that went far beyond typical sporting purposes, though the true sophistication of their training remained invisible to casual observation. Dr. Turner's regular veterinary seminars evolved to include subtle elements of emergency response preparation. While officially focusing on animal care, these gatherings provided opportunities for medical professionals throughout the region to coordinate and prepare for potential crises. The network of prepared medical responders grew steadily, though their enhanced capabilities remained unobtrusive. Blackwood's influence extended to how the community approached everyday challenges. His emphasis on thorough preparation and patient observation began to influence everything from local business practices to school security measures. The valley's residents learned to approach problems with the same methodical thoroughness that had proven so effective during the Reeves Gang incident. The transformation wasn't just about security. It represented a fundamental shift in how the community understood its own capabilities. Residents discovered that effective defense didn't require sacrificing their way of life or turning their homes into obvious fortresses. Instead, they learned to enhance their security through careful preparation and coordination while maintaining their community's traditional character. Perhaps most significantly, the valley's children grew up understanding concepts of awareness and preparation that went far beyond typical rural education. Through programs like Jimmy Parker's mentorship initiative and the enhanced agricultural curriculum, young people developed capabilities that would serve them well throughout their lives, all while appearing to be nothing more than traditional rural skills. 5 years after the Reeves gang incident, the ripple effects of Blackwood's defensive strategy continued to influence a new generation of security specialists worldwide. The quiet rancher's approach to integrated defense had evolved from a local success story into a fundamental shift in how security professionals approach the protection of vulnerable communities. His legacy lived on not just in tactical manuals and training programs, but in the transformed mindset of those responsible for defending others. The United States Military Academy at West Point incorporated the Blackwood Doctrine into its advanced tactical studies curriculum. Cadets learned how the principles demonstrated at Pine Ridge Ranch could be applied to protecting civilian populations in conflict zones. Colonel Sarah Martinez, head of asymmetrical warfare studies, noted that Blackwood had revolutionized their understanding of defensive operations. He showed us that true security isn't about overwhelming force. It's about making defense an organic part of everyday life. The FBI's Advanced Training Division developed an entire program based on Blackwood's psychological approach to threat. Deterrence. Special Agent Michael Rivera led the initiative to integrate these principles into federal law enforcement operations. What makes Blackwood's method revolutionary, he explained to a class of senior agents, is how it transforms ordinary civilian infrastructure into a comprehensive defensive system without ever revealing its tactical capabilities. International. Defense contractors began incorporating Blackwood's concepts into their facility protection designs. Rather than relying on obvious security measures, they focused on subtle modifications that served dual purposes. James Thompson, chief architect for Global Security Solutions, credited Blackwood's influence. He taught us that the most effective defensive features are the ones that appear to have no defensive purpose at all. Dr. Turner's integration of medical preparedness into veterinary practice spawned a new field of study in emergency response planning. Medical schools across the country began offering specialized courses in discrete emergency preparation, teaching healthcare professionals how to build response capabilities that remained invisible until needed. The Turner Protocol became standard terminology in disaster preparedness circles. Young Jimmy Parker, now a respected instructor at the National Rural Law Enforcement Training Center, continued developing the principles he had learned during that crucial confrontation. His programs taught officers how to build community-based defense networks that operated beneath the surface of normal daily life. The most important lesson Blackwood taught us, he often told his students, was that true strength lies in preparation that never needs to be demonstrated. The Reeves brothers themselves, serving their sentences in federal prison, became unexpected ambassadors for Blackwood's approach. Their experience had so profoundly impacted their understanding of professional capability that they began working with law enforcement to help other criminals understand the futility of violence against properly prepared communities. Victor Reeves' insights into how thoroughly Blackwood's strategy had dismantled their tactical advantages proved invaluable for security planners. Blackwood's influence extended into the private sector, where corporations began rethinking their approach to facility protection. Rather than relying on obvious security measures, companies learned to integrate defensive capabilities into normal business operations. Security consultants studied how Pine Ridge Ranch had maintained complete tactical superiority while appearing to be nothing more than a working cattle farm. The academic community continued to analyze and expand upon Blackwood's principles. The Journal of Defense Studies dedicated an entire issue to examining how his approach could be adapted to protect various types of vulnerable facilities. Dr. Elizabeth Armstrong's comprehensive analysis, The Invisible Fortress, Defensive Integration in Civilian Infrastructure, became required reading in advanced security management programs. Perhaps most significantly, Blackwood's legacy lived on in the transformed understanding of what constituted effective defense. Security professionals learned that true protection didn't require choosing between normal operations and tactical preparation. Instead, they discovered how defensive capabilities could grow naturally from ordinary activities, creating protection systems that remained invisible until needed. The rancher himself continued his quiet life at Pine Ridge Ranch, still tending in cattle and maintaining his property with the same careful attention to detail that had made him legendary. He occasionally provided guidance to security specialists seeking to understand his methods, but always emphasized that his approach wasn't about specific tactics. It was about developing a comprehensive understanding of how defense could be integrated into normal life. As a new generation of security specialists emerged, influenced by Blackwood's principles, they carried forward his most important lesson: that the most effective defense isn't about showing strength, but about developing capabilities that never need to be demonstrated until the crucial moment. His legacy lived on in countless facilities and communities worldwide, where ordinary-looking infrastructure concealed sophisticated defensive capabilities that most would never notice until they needed them. In Shadow Creek Valley, the transformation initiated by Blackwood's influence had become so thoroughly integrated into daily life that newer residents barely recognized its existence. What appeared to be ordinary community activities, weekend shooting competitions, agricultural workshops, veterinary seminars, actually served as regular training and coordination opportunities. The annual county fair, seemingly just a traditional rural celebration, functioned as a sophisticated security exercise, where community members practiced observation techniques and communication protocols under the guise of ordinary social interaction. Sheriff Parker, approaching retirement after 25 years of service, had trained a new generation of deputies in the principles of the Pine Ridge Protocol. His successor, Deputy Chief Maria Gonzalez, had embraced Blackwood's defensive philosophy with the same quiet dedication, further refining the integration of security into normal law enforcement activities. Under her guidance, routine patrol routes had been redesigned to provide optimal observation coverage while appearing completely conventional to outside observers. Dr. Turner had expanded her veterinary practice to include 3 young associates, each carefully selected not just for their medical skills, but for their ability to understand and apply the principles of integrated defense. Her regular farm visits now covered the entire county, creating a comprehensive observation network disguised as routine animal health care. Her trainees learned to spot unusual activities or potential threats while conducting ordinary veterinary procedures, reporting their observations through a sophisticated communication system hidden within normal medical records. Eleanor Mitchell's feed store had become a regional hub for the Valley's invisible security network. What appeared to be routine supply deliveries actually transported specialized equipment and materials throughout the region. The store's weekly inventory meetings served as intelligence briefings for key community members, all conducted with such natural casualness that even regular customers never suspected their dual purpose. Jimmy Parker had taken over day-to-day operations at Pine Ridge Ranch, allowing Blackwood to focus on refining and teaching his defensive principles. Under Jimmy's management, the ranch had expanded its cattle operation, providing economic stability for the community while serving as a practical laboratory for testing and improving integrated security concepts. The ranch's regular cattle drives, seemingly traditional ranching activities, actually served as complex tactical exercises, allowing community members to practice coordinated movement and communication across difficult terrain without attracting attention. Blackwood himself had found unexpected fulfillment in his role as a security educator. From his modest ranch office, he consulted with defense specialists from around the world, sharing insights that continued to revolutionize approaches to protective operations. What had begun as personal defensive preparation had evolved into a comprehensive philosophy that was reshaping security thinking on a global scale. Yet despite his growing influence, Blackwood maintained the same unassuming demeanor that had once caused the Reeves gang to fatally underestimate him. Visitors to Pine Ridge Ranch still encountered a seemingly ordinary cattle operation run by a quiet, aging rancher. Only those with trained eyes could detect the sophisticated security infrastructure concealed beneath its rustic appearance. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when the Reeves gang had made their fatal mistake, Blackwood sat on his porch with Dr. Turner, watching the sunrise paint Shadow Creek Valley in shades of gold and amber. "Sometimes I wonder if we've gone too far," he mused, gesturing toward the peaceful landscape where every natural feature and structure served dual purposes. "The valley's become exactly what I designed it to be, a perfect defensive position. That doesn't look defensive at all." Dr. Turner considered his words carefully before responding. "That's exactly why it works, Dan. What we've created isn't just about security, it's about building a community that protects itself through awareness and preparation rather than fear and force." Blackwood nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her observation. What had begun as his personal refuge had evolved into something far more significant, a model for how communities could protect themselves without sacrificing their character or way of life. As the morning light illuminated the valley, the subtle signs of his influence were visible to his trained eye. The carefully positioned ranch houses with their optimal observation angles, the communications equipment disguised as ordinary agricultural infrastructure, the precisely arranged fence lines creating interlocking fields of fire. Yet to an ordinary observer, it all appeared to be nothing more than a picturesque rural community going about its daily business. That perfect balance between function and appearance represented the ultimate fulfillment of his defensive philosophy, protection that remained invisible until the moment it was needed. Across the nation, other communities had begun implementing versions of the Pine Ridge Protocol, adapting Blackwood's principles to their own unique environments and needs. Remote fishing villages in Alaska, farming communities in the Midwest, and small towns in the Appalachian Mountains had all discovered how integrated defense could enhance their security without changing their essential character. Law enforcement agencies serving these areas reported significant decreases in criminal activity, not because they had increased their visible presence, but because potential offenders sensed the underlying preparedness without being able to identify its source. The Department of Homeland Security's annual assessment of rural vulnerability had documented this phenomenon, noting that communities implementing Blackwood-inspired protocols demonstrated extraordinary resilience to criminal exploitation, without obvious security enhancements. In academic circles, this effect had acquired a name: the Blackwood deterrent, defined as the psychological impact of invisible but comprehensive defensive preparation on potential adversaries. Criminal psychology researchers studying this effect found that experienced offenders often reported an inexplicable sense of unease when entering communities protected by such measures, describing them as feeling wrong without being able to articulate specific concerns. This unconscious recognition of concealed defensive preparation often led them to abandon planned operations without ever understanding exactly what had deterred them. The international implications of Blackwood's approach had proven equally significant. In conflict zones around the world, vulnerable communities had begun implementing similar principles, learning to integrate protective measures into their normal activities without attracting unwanted attention. Aid organizations working in these regions reported that such communities demonstrated remarkable resilience against various threats, from criminal exploitation to insurgent infiltration. NATO's Field Manual for Civilian Protection now included a chapter on integrated community defense, drawing heavily on the principles Blackwood had demonstrated at Pine Ridge Ranch. The United Nations Peacekeeping Division had developed training programs based on these same concepts, teaching local populations how to enhance their security, without appearing to militarize their communities. What made these developments particularly remarkable was that they represented a fundamental shift away from traditional security thinking. Rather than relying on obvious displays of force or specialized equipment, the Blackwood approach emphasized the integration of defensive capabilities into ordinary civilian infrastructure and activities. This shift had profound implications not just for physical security, but for community psychology as well. Traditional security measures often generated fear and tension, changing how people lived and interacted. By contrast, Blackwood's integrated approach allowed communities to maintain their normal character while significantly enhancing their protective capabilities. Dr. Elizabeth Armstrong's follow-up study, The Psychology of Invisible Defense, documented how communities implementing these principles reported higher levels of confidence and lower levels of security-related anxiety than those relying on traditional protective measures. When people don't see constant reminders of potential threats, she wrote, they maintain a more balanced psychological outlook while actually enjoying greater protection. In Shadow Creek Valley, this psychological benefit was evident in the community's thriving culture. Despite having one of the most sophisticated defensive infrastructures in the country, the valley maintained the relaxed, welcoming atmosphere of a traditional rural community. Children played freely outdoors, neighbors gathered for social events without security concerns, and visitors were greeted with genuine warmth rather than suspicion. This natural openness, paradoxically, was made possible by the invisible but comprehensive protective network that Blackwood had helped establish. On this particular morning, as Blackwood and Dr. Turner enjoyed their coffee on the porch, Sheriff Parker's patrol vehicle made its way up the long driveway to Pine Ridge Ranch. As the sheriff approached, his expression suggested he brought significant news. "Morning, Dan, Melissa," he greeted them, accepting the offered cup of coffee before settling into one of the porch chairs. "Just got word from the federal prosecutor's office. Victor Reeves' cooperation has led to the arrest of 3 more criminal organizations operating across state lines. His testimony has been instrumental in dismantling networks that have been targeting rural communities for years." Blackwood nodded, unsurprised but satisfied by this development. "He's a smart man. Once he understood the principles of what we've built here, he recognized the implications for his former associates." "That's what makes your approach so effective, Dan," Parker observed. "It doesn't just stop individual threats, it changes how people think about vulnerability and security." This observation captured the essence of Blackwood's legacy. Beyond the specific tactical innovations he had introduced, his most significant contribution had been a fundamental reconsideration of what effective defense actually meant. By demonstrating that security could be achieved through intelligent preparation and community coordination rather than obvious force, he had initiated a quiet revolution in protective thinking. The ramifications of this shift continued to spread, influencing approaches to security challenges at every level, from individual homes to international borders. As the 3 friends discussed these developments, young riders from the community's youth mentorship program passed by on horseback, waving respectfully to Blackwood as they continued their morning patrol disguised as a recreational ride. Their casual movements revealed nothing of the sophisticated observation exercise they were conducting, yet their trained eyes missed nothing as they traversed the valley's key vantage points. This seamless integration of security into normal activities epitomized everything Blackwood had worked to achieve. Hard to believe it all started with a group of criminals making the mistake of targeting the wrong ranch, Dr. Turner remarked. Watching the young riders disappear around a bend in the road, Blackwood smiled slightly, his weathered face reflecting both pride and humility. The principles were always there, waiting to be applied. The Reeves gang just provided the opportunity to demonstrate them in action. As the morning progressed, the valley continued its seemingly ordinary routines. Farmers tended their fields, ranchers moved their livestock, and shopkeepers opened their businesses. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, a sophisticated defensive network remained vigilant, ready to respond to any threat with the same quiet efficiency that had dismantled the Reeves gang's operation years before. This perfect balance between normal life and comprehensive security represented Blackwood's true achievement, not just protecting a single ranch, but demonstrating how an entire community could defend itself without sacrificing its essential character. The deadly shots that had never needed to be fired had ultimately protected far more than just Pine Ridge Ranch. They had inspired a new understanding of defense that continued to safeguard communities around the world, an invisible legacy more powerful than any bullet could ever be. 10 years after the Reeves gang incident, Daniel "Silent Shadow" Blackwood stood on the ridge overlooking Pine Ridge Ranch, watching the golden sunset cast long shadows across Shadow Creek Valley. At 65, his frame remained lean and strong, though silver now dominated his once dark hair. The decade had brought profound changes to both the valley and to how the world understood defensive operations. The National Defense University had established the Blackwood Center for Integrated Security Studies, dedicated to researching and teaching the principles that had originated on this quiet Colorado ranch. Military officers, law enforcement leaders, and security specialists from around the world now traveled to the center to learn how defensive capabilities could be seamlessly integrated into civilian environments without compromising their essential character. Down in the valley, Pine Ridge Ranch had evolved while maintaining its authentic identity as a working cattle operation. Jimmy Parker, now the ranch's full owner, after Blackwood had transferred the property to him 5 years earlier, had expanded the operation to include an agricultural education center where the principles of integrated defense were taught under the guise of sustainable ranching practices. The casual observer would notice nothing unusual about the facility, just another rural education center teaching traditional skills to a new generation. But those with trained eyes would recognize how every aspect of its design served dual purposes, providing both agricultural functionality and sophisticated defensive capabilities. "You're looking philosophical today," came a familiar voice behind him. Dr. Melissa Turner, now in her 50s and still serving as the region's chief veterinarian, climbed the last few feet to join him at his vantage point. Their friendship had deepened over the years, evolving into a partnership that balanced her practical medical expertise with his strategic vision. "Just appreciating how far things have come," Blackwood replied, gesturing toward the valley. "Nothing looks different to the casual observer, but everything has changed." Dr. Turner nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his observation. "That's the beauty of what you created, Dan. The best security is the kind no one ever notices until they need it." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of an official-looking black SUV making its way up the winding road toward their position. Even at this distance, Blackwood recognized the vehicle as belonging to General Michael Hayes, current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and one of the earliest military leaders to recognize the revolutionary potential of Blackwood's defensive philosophy. "Looks like your 3 o'clock appointment is running early," Dr. Turner observed. Blackwood nodded, unsurprised. Hayes was always punctual, even back when he was just a colonel studying our setup here. The general's visit was more than a social call. Earlier that month, an incident in Eastern Europe had demonstrated the international impact of Blackwood's principles. A small village, trained in integrated defensive measures by NATO advisors who had studied the Pine Ridge Protocol, had successfully deterred an attack by a well-armed militia group without firing a shot. The militia, expecting an easy target, had instead encountered a community prepared in ways they couldn't identify but instinctively recognized as dangerous. After several failed attempts to establish tactical advantage, they had withdrawn without ever engaging directly. Surveillance footage later revealed their commander's frustrated assessment. "Something's wrong with this place. They're ready for us, but I can't tell how." This outcome, deterrence through invisible preparation, represented the ultimate vindication of Blackwood's approach. The general was here to discuss how this success could be replicated on a larger scale in vulnerable regions worldwide. As they watched the SUV navigate the final approach, Dr. Turner reflected on how completely Blackwood's vision had been realized. "When you first started modifying the ranch all those years ago, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Blackwood smiled slightly, the expression softening his weathered features. "I was just trying to create a safe place to live out my days. Everything else grew from that simple goal." This modesty was characteristic of the man, but it understated the profound impact of his innovations. The academic community had coined a term for his approach: transparent defensive integration, defined as the seamless incorporation of protective measures into ordinary civilian infrastructure without visual or operational compromise. This concept had revolutionized security thinking across multiple disciplines, challenging the traditional assumption that effective protection required obvious hardening or militarization. Colonel Sarah Martinez, now commanding the Advanced Tactical Studies Division at West Point, had perhaps best articulated its significance. Blackwood didn't just create a new defensive methodology. He fundamentally redefined what security means. In the modern world, as General Hayes's vehicle reached their position, Blackwood and Dr. Turner prepared to welcome him. The meeting would focus on practical applications, but the philosophical implications of Blackwood's approach extended far beyond specific tactical considerations. By demonstrating that true security grew from integration rather than segregation, from preparation rather than reaction, and from community coordination rather than individual armament, he had initiated a paradigm shift that continued to influence thinking at the highest levels of national defense. "Let's not keep the general waiting," Blackwood said, turning toward the path down from the ridge. "He's come a long way to discuss the future." That evening, after the general's departure, Blackwood sat on his cabin porch with Sheriff Maria Gonzalez, sharing insights from the high-level meeting. Gonzalez, who had succeeded Robert Parker 5 years earlier, had further refined the implementation of the Pine Ridge Protocol throughout Shadow Creek County, creating one of the most secure rural jurisdictions in the nation without increasing visible law enforcement presence. The general wants to establish training centers in 3 additional countries, Blackwood explained. Their rural communities are facing threats similar to what we dealt with during the Reeves incident, but on a much larger scale. Gonzalez nodded, understanding the implications. "The principles transfer well. We've seen that with the programs we've established in neighboring counties." Under her leadership, the Sheriff's Department had developed a regional training initiative that taught other rural law enforcement agencies how to implement aspects of the Pine Ridge Protocol in their own jurisdictions. The results had been remarkable. Participating counties reported significant decreases in criminal activity without increased security budgets or personnel. "The key is making it look like normal community development," Gonzalez continued. "When We helped Rio County reorganize their patrol routes based on your principles. We presented it as a fuel efficiency measure. Their criminal element never recognized it as a defensive restructuring. This subtle approach characterized all applications of Blackwood's methodology. By disguising security enhancements as ordinary improvements, communities avoided both the psychological burden of visible security measures and the tactical disadvantage of telegraphing their defensive capabilities. "Speaking of the Reeves gang," Gonzalez said, changing the subject, "I got word from the federal prison system yesterday. Victor Reeves is being considered for early release based on his continued cooperation. His insights have helped dismantle 7 major criminal networks operating across state lines." Blackwood considered this information thoughtfully. Victor Reeves's transformation from criminal leader to security consultant represented another unexpected outcome of that rainy morning. Confrontation a decade earlier. After experiencing the comprehensive nature of Blackwood's defensive system, Reeves had developed a genuine respect for the approach that had defeated him so completely. "He understands the principles better than most," Blackwood observed. "He approached our defenses from the adversary's perspective and recognized their effectiveness firsthand." This practical insight made Reeves particularly valuable to security planners, who benefited from his ability to identify vulnerabilities that might not be apparent to those with conventional training. His younger brother Ethan, serving a longer sentence due to his previous violent offenses, had undergone a similar transformation, now teaching marksmanship and tactical assessment to federal law enforcement officers from his prison facility. Even Mason Winters and Travis Jackson had found unexpected purpose after their incarceration. Winters' military background and subsequent criminal experience made him an ideal instructor for counterinsurgency specialists, learning to identify disguised defensive preparations, while Jackson's expertise with explosives had been redirected toward developing countermeasures for improvised threats. Kevin Lawson, the youngest member of the gang, had perhaps experienced the most dramatic transformation. After serving a shorter sentence due to his age and lesser role in the gang's activities, he had enrolled in law enforcement training, eventually joining the sheriff's department in his home county. His first-hand understanding of how young men were drawn into criminal activities made him particularly effective in youth intervention programs. "It's ironic," Gonzalez remarked, "how many lives were ultimately improved because the Reeves gang chose your ranch that morning." Blackwood nodded, recognizing the truth in her observation. The confrontation that could have ended in violence had instead initiated a cascade of positive changes, extending far beyond the immediate participants. This outcome validated his core philosophy, that superior preparation could achieve results that force alone could never accomplish. The following morning brought another visitor to Pine Ridge Ranch. Eleanor Mitchell, now in her 70s but still actively involved in the community's defensive network, arrived with news from her extensive connections throughout the region. "The monitoring system picked up something interesting yesterday," she reported as Blackwood poured her coffee in the ranch kitchen. A group of 3 vehicles circled the county twice, paying particular attention to the eastern approaches to the valley. Such information gathering was part of the invisible security infrastructure that protected Shadow Creek Valley. What appeared to be ordinary business operations, Mitchell's feed store deliveries, Dr. Turner's veterinary visits, routine postal routes, actually created a comprehensive surveillance network covering the entire region. Jimmy's students spotted them too, Blackwood replied, referring to the Agricultural Education Center that served as both a legitimate teaching facility and a training ground for observation techniques. They were driving rental vehicles with Nevada plates. Could be nothing, but we'll maintain awareness. This casual response reflected the community's approach to potential threats, neither overreacting nor ignoring, but maintaining vigilant Observation while continuing normal activities. The valley's defensive network didn't depend on confrontation or intimidation, but on comprehensive awareness and coordinated preparation. As they discussed the situation, Dr. Turner arrived for their regular morning meeting. The three had formed an informal leadership council that coordinated the valley's integrated defense system, each bringing different expertise to their shared mission. "I've adjusted my rounds to include the eastern properties over the next few days," she announced, seamlessly incorporating security considerations into her veterinary practice. "Several ranches have legitimate medical needs, so it won't look unusual." This natural integration of defensive awareness into normal professional activities exemplified Blackwood's methodology. Throughout the valley, residents maintained similar dual awareness. Teachers who noticed unusual vehicles while walking to school, postal workers who recognized pattern disruptions in their communities, store clerks who observed customer behaviors. With trained eyes, none of these individuals would be identified as security personnel, yet collectively they created a monitoring system more comprehensive than any conventional surveillance operation. This human intelligence network, disguised within ordinary community activities, had proven more effective than sophisticated technical systems costing millions of dollars. "The beauty of our approach," Mitchell observed, as they reviewed the community's response, "is that potential threats never know they're being observed. They see normal people going about normal business, not recognizing that every unusual movement or behavior is being noted and communicated." This invisible vigilance had protected the valley for a decade, deterring numerous potential threats without ever drawing attention to the community's defensive capabilities. Many would-be criminals had simply moved on, unconsciously responding to the subtle signals of preparedness without ever understanding why the valley felt like an undesirable target. By mid-afternoon, the community's invisible network had identified the three vehicles as belonging to a documentary film crew researching rural security innovations. Their interest in the region was legitimate. They had appropriate credentials and had made formal requests for interviews with several local officials. The system had worked exactly as designed, identifying and assessing the potential concern without disrupting normal activities or revealing its methods. That evening, Blackwood walked alone through the quiet beauty of Pine Ridge Ranch. The cattle moved peacefully in their pastures. The outbuildings stood in perfect maintenance, and the land showed the careful stewardship of generations. To any observer, it appeared to be nothing more remarkable than a well-run cattle operation. Only Blackwood, with his intimate knowledge of the property's design, could appreciate how thoroughly its peaceful appearance concealed its defensive capabilities. Every fence line, every structure, every natural feature had been positioned or modified to serve dual purposes, creating an integrated defensive system that remained invisible until needed. As twilight settled over the valley, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. What had begun as personal preparation, a combat veteran creating a secure refuge, had evolved into something far more significant. The principles he had applied to protecting his ranch had grown into a comprehensive philosophy that was now safeguarding communities around the world. More importantly, his approach had demonstrated that true security didn't require sacrificing the very qualities that made communities worth protecting. By integrating defensive capabilities into normal activities and infrastructure, he had shown how protection could be achieved without the psychological and social costs of obvious security measures. The stars appeared overhead as darkness finally claimed the valley. From his vantage point, Blackwood could see the scattered lights of ranches and homes throughout Shadow Creek Valley, each one a part of the community he had helped to protect and transform. Despite his international recognition and the widespread adoption of his methods, this peaceful valley remained his greatest achievement. Here, ordinary people lived extraordinary lives, carrying forward the principles he had taught them while maintaining the authentic character of their rural community. They had achieved what many believed impossible: comprehensive security that enhanced rather than compromised their way of life. As he turned back toward his cabin, Blackwood smiled slightly at the ultimate irony of his legacy. The deadly shots that had made him legendary during his military career had ultimately proven less significant than the shots he never had to fire at Pine Ridge Ranch. By demonstrating that superior preparation could prevent violence rather than merely respond to it, he had changed not just how communities defended themselves, but how they understood the very concept of security. That quiet revolution, born in the confrontation with the Reeves gang, but nurtured through years of patient implementation, would continue to protect vulnerable communities long after both he and the ranch were gone. It was a legacy more enduring than any bullet could ever be. Security defined not by force, but by foresight, not by isolation, but by integration, not by fear, but by preparation. And in that achievement lay the true meaning of defense, not merely preventing harm, but preserving value, creating spaces where ordinary life could flourish without the shadow of constant threat. The peaceful valley before him, where children played freely and neighbors lived without fear while remaining perfectly protected, represented the fulfillment of that vision. Silent Shadow Blackwood, once the most lethal sniper in Navy SEAL history, now the architect of a revolutionary approach to community defense, had discovered that the most powerful protection came not from the shots you fired, but from creating conditions where shots never needed to be fired at all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.